Welcome back to episode 85 of the Game Time Guru podcast. This is part 2 of my interview with Vern. Now, in part 1, we learned about his background from high school all the way up through the time where he was drafted. We also learned about the impact of his religious beliefs on his career. Now we're going to be learning about his professional career, and we're going to be talking about what his opinion is of the actual game of baseball itself. We'll talk about what happened as he went through the minors all the way up to the majors, and then we'll talk about his time in the Army as he spent 2 years after, going to the service during the war. So this is going to be an interesting part 2, starting off with his professional career. Keep in mind, this interview was done during the World Series this year, right after the Dodgers and the Red Sox went into 18 innings. So you'll hear a reference to that as well. I hope you guys enjoy part 2 of episode 85. Now we're going to talk about the professional side of it. You're at the Pittsburgh Pirates. You've started your career as far as in the majors, and I want to get your insight, just basically explaining your journey, and we'll get to your journey up until the 1960 season when you played in the World Series. Let's explain your journey from the Pirates right when you got there, your first year with them, all the way up until that year, and then we'll get into the World Series later. So let's go ahead and talk about your professional career with the Pirates up until the 1960 season.
Well, the game has certainly changed without question. This game last night that went, and I guess it was 18 innings. I watched through the 15th, and then I had to get to bed because, you get my age, I could have fallen asleep, as the way the game was going there for so long. But anyway, the journey was fun. I learned a lot, going from when I first got there was, I had my wife with me. We went right straight to the ballpark, and I had never been in a big ballpark like that in my life. And they wanted my impression of how it was and so forth. And I guess my reputation got there before I did because, I don't know what was written, in the papers prior to my getting there, but then after being excited about being there and everything, they asked me the question, well, what about the church that you belong to? Is that something that's going to be helpful to you, or what's your responsibilities? And so I talked to them about the things that we practice in the church, that my being a priesthood holder, an elder at the time, and as it turned out, I discussed, the Aaronic priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, my responsibilities and so forth as being a member of the church, about my being a full tithe payer and so forth, and so that just kind of opened the door for so many opportunities for me to speak to youth groups and even back then, they didn't. Let me just say, the players got all the paid engagements. I got all the church and youth groups and little leagues and so forth to talk to the kids and so forth. And so there were so many stories that I could tell you about those experiences. But anyway, I think everybody's got to have some faith, belong to something that gives you a secure feeling, and feeling good about yourself. And so to be successful, that had to happen to me, and when I first got there, I sat on the bench for a couple games, and then they let me get in the bullpen, and I'd get in and pitch a few innings, and so forth, and then all of a sudden I found out that I was a starter from that point on. And I pitched those years. The first year we went through it, and it was a good experience. A matter of fact, my catcher come up to me and told me, says, even though we're not a good ball club, you're going to win a lot of games before your career's over. And so But, that gave me more encouragement, and I had a lot of faith in my catchers and so forth, and they knew exactly how I liked to pitch, to give me a target to throw to, and so they helped me to learn how to pitch to different hitters and so forth, and we'd have meetings in the clubhouse and talk about different hitters, and so that they could place our outfielders, infielders in position and so forth. All this, we'd discuss the opposing team and how you're going to pitch to them and so on. And so that was always a big help to me to know a little about some of the guys that I had never seen before and pitch to their weaknesses. And so that was very good. That was good help for me. And then, as I went through the league and so forth, I got to know, the good hitters and so forth and how to pitch to them. And so my first year was a good experience, and now my second year, this was it's called up in 1950. In 1951, I started out the year, very good. But I could tell you this: the first two games that I pitched in as a starter was against Robin Roberts, who now is in the Hall of Fame. But my first game, I pitched very well. We were in the last inning, and I remember it like it was just yesterday. In the ninth inning, the score was tied 2-2, and they got a man on second base with 2 outs. And so there's a little fly ball that was hit just over the shortstop. Stan Rojak was my shortstop, and out Ralph Kiner, the home run hitter, was in left field. Well, Rojak goes back and he's hollering, "I got it, I got it, I got it," and then he hears Ralph coming in. It's really Ralph's ball, because if he can catch it, it's easier for him to catch than it is for the shortstop going back. Well, he hears Ralph coming, so he stops, and then Ralph stops because he said, "I got it, I got it." The ball falls in, the guy scores, and I get beat 3-2. And then 4 days later, it was an instant replay. The same 2 guys, the same score, everything. And I just said to myself, I've seen this in high school. What's going on? I need better support than this, So, but that's how my career started, with a couple losses to Robin Roberts. But, pitching well and doing my job, I'm not the one that's going to mess up, I'm just going to keep bearing down and doing the best I can. And that was my attitude. And so, now, in 1951, we start out the season. We go into Chicago, and I think we opened up the series with Cincinnati. That seemed to be a legend kind of a thing that they did. We'd start with Cincinnati, and then we'd go on, and so we'd go to Chicago. Well, I'm pitching this day, and it's a rainy day, and it's cold in Chicago with the wind blowing, and it was not a nice day. It's probably a lot like what they had in Boston, the first game there in the World Series, as they started the season there, for them. But the World Series. And so now here we are. We were playing in the rain there and everything, and I can remember I had a lead in the game. We were winning, and we get to the 7th inning and decide to call it. Well, what happened now is I go in, and I change my uniform and everything, get all my dry stuff on my body, and so now about an hour and a half they decide to replay to get back out and finish the game. Well, I got out there, I got in a little bit of trouble. I warmed up well, I thought, but I knew I pulled something in my shoulder. Now, they would never, ever even think about putting their starter back in after a rain delay like that. And so, but that's what happened, and so I had a slight tear in my rotor cuff, in my shoulder, and so, but I struggled through that year. I could take 10 days, in between my starts, and I could pitch 4 or 5 innings, and then I could hardly reach home plate. And so it just didn't work out that year.
So you had to battle through the injuries and all those, adversities that you had to go through. But then another obstacle was dealing with the draft for the war that was going on at the time. So can you explain that process? Because, players, like professional baseball players, weren't exempt from the draft. So explain that whole process and how that worked out for you.
Well, as things happened, during that period, I knew I was going to have to go to the end of the service because of the war that was going on at that point. So, so I called, after the season was over, I called the draft board and asked them, well, what's my situation? He says, well, we plan on, sending you a letter here right shortly. And so I went into the service. I was in the service for 2 years. I was assigned there in the Transportation Corps in Virginia, down at Fort Eustis, and I spent I did spend my 2 years there. I was put on orders to go overseas, but a guy took my place just before I was supposed to start processing. He had re-enlisted with the idea he'd be on the next shipment, so he took my place. Well, at the time, my wife Anita was pregnant with our first child, and she was 18 days overdue. And of course, I said, "Oh, that's a God sent from heaven for that guy to take my place," because I certainly didn't want to. I didn't even tell my wife about this, until I found out that this guy. And I said, you were just about without a husband, so. Anyway, I spent those 2 years, and then I went back to start my career over again there in 1954. I was put on the reserve list, for those 2 years, but I got credit for them because that was one of the rules. I got 2 years on credit as far as my pension was concerned. So anyway, that's, to that point.
Real quick, Vern, I just wanted to check with you real quick. When you were in the service, did you get a chance to polish up your game and play a little bit?
I did while I was in the service. I did play on the post team. I didn't pitch at that time because my arm just was no good. I could still throw a little bit, but not get on the mound and do a good job. So. That was a struggle for me, but I finally, just before I got out of the service, I played for a Seaford's town team that they had, and I started throwing, and I did okay, and my arm was coming around a little bit, and so that was my 2 years that I would. That service time helped heal my shoulder and everything, but then I had adhesions in there, and I had to get them stretched out again and get back in shape, which I did, and so that went fine, but still our team was still struggling. They lost 112 games while I was the 1 year that I remember while I was in the service, but we were not a good team. It was like a AAA team trying to play in the big leagues. But as it turned out, the club made a couple trades, as we progressed, and finally we got to 1958, I think I won 18 games that year, and we're starting to improve, getting better players and so forth, and finally our general manager made a trade and got a catcher, Smokey Burgess, and Jerry Lynch, who was a great pinch hitter for us, a good hitter, and also Harvey Haddix, got them from Cincinnati, and then Bill Vern, we got him from the Cardinals, And so now we've got some pretty good guys that can help win some games for us, you know. And so that was big, really big for our team. And of course, as you get better players, your record's going to get a little bit better too, because if you keep pitching well, you've got a chance to win, you know. And so that all took place. And but you know, I'd like to just mention one story that happened early on, because we had it was my second year there in Pittsburgh that I picked up a nickname, because we had an outfielder called Wally Westlake, who was a home run hitter and a good outdoors man. And so he started calling me preacher. And you know, Wally, I don't go out preaching. I'm a baseball player. You know, that's not my job. You know, but I do oftentimes have speaking engagements that I speak in the churches and so forth. And so you know, and again, as I says, you know, I'm an elder in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You know, and he said, well, you know, people didn't know what an elder was back there in Pittsburgh, other than an older person, I guess, being an elder person. But anyway, he also says, well, you know, how about, well, they do know what a deacon is. You know, they know what a deacon is. Other churches have deacons and so forth. And so he started calling me deacon. He says, is that all right if I call you deacon? I said, yeah, that's fine. Well, of course, that gave me a lot of experiences that way, too, because when people read about that in a newspaper, why, you know, I've got a story to tell. And so I have a lot of speaking engagements in various churches. But that, you know, that's a little story that, and to this day, my teammates that are still alive, they still call me deacon. The umpires during those years called me deacon. The other opposing players called me deacon, you know. And so, anyway, that nickname has stuck, you know. And so that's one of the things that I think give me a lot of wonderful experiences to remember.
That's super cool. It's super cool to hear how you got your nickname, the Deacon, and how this has all progressed. You were able to play in the service and then continue on afterwards as if nothing ever happened. And now we're to the 1958 season, correct?
We're back up to 58. And our team, if we'd had another good pitcher, well, we'd probably went to the World Series that year, because our record was really good. And then 59, well, it was the same kind of situation. You know, we played well, and again, we were just battling, you know, to try to get to the big, you know, to the big show in the World Series. But that didn't happen in 59, but it's interesting because in 60, when we went to spring training, why the guy that had a cigar store right next to the hotel, he had written up a big sign put on front, 1960 World Champions, you know, and that's what they were hoping for. And, of course, that was what we were hoping for, too, because we did have a good year in 1959. And so, but that's a year that all of us kind of had good years, all of us together. And that's what you need. You have to have a good team, good players, and everyone perform up to their best abilities. And that did happen in 1960. I can remember games where in the ninth inning, we won 30-some games from the seventh inning on that year. And many a times we were behind, like this one game in the ninth inning. We're 3 runs down with 2 outs and count 3-2 on our last hitter. And we ended up winning that game, you know. And so we had a team that would just never quit. And so, you know, that game right there, we just knew, you know, that we're going to win it. You know, we just, as a team. and everybody kept rooting for each other, which didn't happen early on in my career. Everybody was a little jealous if that pitcher out there on the mound, won a game, and the team played well behind him while you knew you were going to lose the next day because this just didn't happen. You didn't win 2 games in a row. So, but in this case, everybody liked each other. We worked together as a team, and to this day, we still have a lot of love and friendship among the team that's still left living in their various places in the country. So we get together every once in a while, and so it's great to get a good hug, from each of the guys. So it was a wonderful experience.
What a cool story to hear about the camaraderie and everything that, Vern was able to experience with that team. And that's one of the things I love about sports is the camaraderie, the brotherhood that you gain when you're playing a team sport like that. You learn to love each other as family, and you build off one another, and that's amazing. So that's going to do it for part 2 of episode 85. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the first 2 parts. Now we're going to finish it off with part 3. We'll be launching in a couple of days, so stay tuned. And make sure you share this episode with your friends and family so they can learn about Vern's story as well. Any baseball historians, fans of the game, anything like that, make sure you share this episode with them, and stay tuned for part 3.